Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our first cybersecurity webinar. The theme is going to be hedge funds and the insider threat. Speaking today, we have Alan Heyman, the CEO of SMLR Group, and we have Joe Lazzarati, who is a shareholder for Jackson Lewis, and we also have Rob Robinette, who is a sales engineer for Raytheon Cyber Products panel. And with that, I would like to present again Mr. Alan Heyman. He is the CEO and founding partner of SMLR Group. And Mr. Heyman, I pass it to you.
Good morning. I guess many people are curious how come we selected hedge funds. We do that because it's a recognizable term, although hedge funds also applies to anybody, any company in the financial services industry. We also would like to discuss what is an insider threat. And out of curiosity, I looked it up under the FBI listing. They're always very helpful. But a company can often detect or control when an outsider, we hope, a non-employee, tries to access company data either physically or electronically, and can mitigate the threat of an outsider stealing company property. However, the thief who is harder to detect and who could cause the most damage is the insider, the employee with legitimate access. The insider may steal solely for personal gain, or that insider may be a spy, someone who's stealing company information or products in order to benefit another organization or country. Well, I was curious. I was at a Raytheon seminar this past week, and the keynote speaker, Abigail, who is the character that the movie Catch Me If You Can was based upon, who now has been working with the FBI for the last 36 years, made a very interesting statement. He has been brought in on every top insider threat hack within the last 36 years. And they have found that 100%, as he said, of all the attacks emanated some shape, form, or manner through an insider, whether the insider was knowing or unknowing. Hijacking insider information gets to be very easy for a professional hacker. But there's also the consideration to be concerned about as to compliance. Not only should a company be aware of the insider threat, but how to maintain their ability to comply with the requirements. And again, we selected the financial industry because of the heavy regulation changes and modifications that have been coming through from that standpoint. The stakeholders involved in accomplishing these types of tasks for a company become everyone from the legal department, the HR department, the IT department, and the compliance department. And it really becomes a team effort to put all this together. No longer is it only the responsibility of the IT people, but it goes way beyond that from that standpoint. And it's important to bring in each of these people in order to accomplish this. I'd like to turn this portion over to Joe Lazzarati, who heads up the privacy practice at Jackson Lewis, because we find very often that the attorney is the individual who is leading the investigation. The attorneys have written the laws, the specifics of the laws. Everybody else has to follow suit. Joe?
Thanks, Alan. It's good to be with you all today. When Alan brought me in on this, it's interesting to see, and I'm grateful for it. It's interesting to see how much the capabilities of monitoring and managing information have grown, and the prospect is that they'll continue to grow, and it's in large part for good reason, because of this insider threat that Alan's talking about. From my vantage point, insider threats are employees, or maybe contractors or subcontractors that are brought inside the fold of a company. And when I talk to clients about this, one of the things that, from a high level, and I think for purposes of this program, it's important to just get a sense of what's the big picture. And for an employer that's managing, trying to protect against this threat, it's really a question of balance. That is, on the one hand, what's the company's obligation? Alan talked about compliance, for sure, that's critical. Business reputation, client relationships, even if there's no mandatory requirement to safeguard data. So there's a number of employer obligations. When you talk specifically, for example, about the financial services industry, you have obligations to monitor certain employees' communications about financial transactions. Even beyond the financial services industry, but also within it, any state that provides protection for trade secrets, any statute, requires also that you show that you've protected it. Something is not a protectable trade secret, generally speaking, unless you've taken steps to protect it. So monitoring is one way of trying to do that. Any one of us that has called a credit card company knows that the calls are recorded and monitored for quality assurance. Whether that's always the case or not, the jury's out, but that's a purpose. There's a number of and an increasing amount of regulation requiring safeguarding data. And one way to safeguard that data, typically it's personal data, is to monitor the movement of that data in an organization. There's been a couple of cases that require monitoring when employees engage in certain activities like viewing child pornography and so on. And of course, there's operational and systems activities that the companies engage in to keep their systems in check, to make sure employees are being productive, and so on. So employers really have a need to monitor their systems, manage their employees, and process information in a way that is efficient and productive. Of course, on the other side of that, that balance that we try to strike are privacy rights that individuals who are being monitored have. And for certain companies, you obviously have, people always assume free speech or Fourth Amendment protections. In general, those are only going to apply in the public sector. Some states like California, those kinds of principles apply in the private sector as well. But for our purposes, while the analysis is informed by principles under the Fourth Amendment, it's technically not applicable, but there still is this expectation of privacy that courts speak about. That is, if an employee's in a situation where the employee is given a feeling or allowed to think that somehow what they're doing on a computer is going to be private, they may have some claim if the employer intrudes on that privacy. There's a case from the 1970s. It's kind of analogous. It involves Kmart, where the employees were all given lockers, but they were also told that you can go out and buy your own lock to lock those lockers. And once the company tried to search those lockers, all of a sudden an expectation of privacy was argued that by giving employees the right to have their own locks, then Kmart created an expectation of privacy. And that very basic technology, if you want to call it that, applies today. If we tell employees they can lock information on a computer in their own way and not allow the employer to access it, they may have and probably will have an expectation of privacy. So in terms of rolling out systems and efforts to manage and monitor and marshal data, it's important to set that expectation where you want it to be as an organization, so that when you do need to engage in monitoring, that you'll be able to do so without the serious threat of an argument that there's somehow an expectation of privacy. There are also other things that I think companies have to think about when they engage, even if it's otherwise permissible. There might be some unintended consequences that arise as a business when you engage in monitoring activities. There was a recent pretty substantial, some call it landmark case, that came out of the decision that came out of the National Labor Relations Board this past week, cases in re Purple Communications. And basically what the NLRB said was that employees have the right to engage in protected concerted activity using the employer's email system during non-work hours. That's the nutshell of the ruling. What's interesting about this is you're hearing now employers start to say, well, should we be monitoring these communications on our systems? Could we monitor these kinds of communications? Because if we monitor them, will they be argued to have chilled the employee's right to engage in that kind of activity? And I don't want to bore you with all of the NLRA meaning behind what constitutes protected concerted activity, but in short, it means employees can communicate with one another about working conditions, and it doesn't have to be a union environment. In fact, the NLRA applies beyond just union employers, and the NLRB is trying to flex its muscles in this area. So when someone thinks, well, we want to monitor our employees and protect our information and do all the things that I kind of outlined above to further the employer's objectives, this overriding surveillance may be argued from an NLRA perspective as chilling protected speech by an employee in a way that you might not think about. The other thing to think about is when companies engage in monitoring, even if it's for the purpose, for example, of protecting a trade secret or complying with FINRA regulations in the financial services industry. In doing that, you may come across information that you really didn't want to have access to in the first place. You might learn about an employee's disability, or you might learn about the employee's spouse's cancer. These situations will create obligations and potentially exposures under the Americans with Disabilities Act, under the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And so questions begin to arise in an employer's head, a company's head, and saying, well, should we be doing this? How often should we be doing it? Who should be the persons doing it? How does that information get filtered and shared when there is an issue we have to address? So these are real questions that companies now with greater ability to engage in a more productive monitoring program are beginning to face as they go down this road. So with that, I wanted to pass it along to Rob at Raytheon to kind of explain to us some of those technologies.
Rob, before you start, this is Alan again. I think it's important to recognize many of the comments that Joe has made in the past has caused companies not to look at monitoring because they didn't want to appear as if they were spying, so to speak. But a new trend is starting to develop where companies are starting to recognize they also have an ethical, moral responsibility to protect the good employees, so to speak, against that one bad apple or two bad apples in a large firm. And the attitude of monitoring has taken on a whole different dimension of protecting employees from that rogue employee from that direction. So monitoring with the proper use, the proper legal considerations, the proper ability becomes a very powerful tool of protection, not only for the company and its intellectual properties, but also for the employees. We see a lot of that happening now. But let's turn it over to Rob to see what kind of software and such can be used, because when many of these laws were put into existence, the software to accomplish these goals were not being utilized. They are now. Rob?
Okay, so just to follow in exactly what Alan was talking about in terms of compliance, looking at both the legal aspects of this as well as HR. Some of the when we're talking about actively monitoring users, Raytheon has a product that we call SureView. And essentially what this is doing, it's a small piece of software that's running on the laptop or a workstation, whatever machine an employee is actually using to log on to a network to access company resources. This software is actually being installed and actively monitoring how that user is behaving on the network, what applications they're using, and what resources and what files they're accessing. And in a lot of cases with this tool, we found, both in government and especially now in the financial services with a lot of companies we're working with right now. Three main concerns that a lot of the financial services companies seem to be concerned with right now. The first and foremost, like Joe was saying, was intellectual property or personal information theft, or breaches, I should say, is what we call it, because there's many cases where data breaches are the result of unintentional. Their intentions are good. It's a matter of a lack of education in terms of educating people on the right procedures to handle data. But in addition to that, there are those instances where people are going out there to try to access information to send it outside the organization for financial gain as well. The second piece we have here is that we really address is fraud and waste. So a lot of, in certain situations, we have HR departments that are very interested in situations where employees are actually using company resources for their own personal gain, or they're going to, like the gentleman said earlier, inappropriate sites, which could cause some legal issues down the road for them. And the last one that we have that a lot of people are starting to become more and more concerned with are the potentially disgruntled employees. Employees that are actually coming in and trying to intentionally, if not destroying information, disrupt business, which ends up costing a company a lot of money as well as their reputation. So with those things in mind, to be able to really get a good grip in your hands around what users are doing to sort of see those indicators that those types of behaviors are happening. We have found a lot of customers have found that monitoring what are users doing right at the endpoint, meaning the machine they're on, is the actual best way for them to determine what's happening and how a user is behaving and how their behaviors are potentially changing. So the way we do this, and I'll keep this at a fairly high level, is you'll see here with the SureView system. The top part you don't really have to worry about. This is more just how things work behind the scenes. But the way this does, once this agent is installed, we have these what we call these sensors, and sensors meaning we can call them monitoring sensors. So these are different pieces of the software that are monitoring all types of communications that an employee is using, whether it's with internal employees or outside the organization. And a couple that I'll just highlight here, all the way to the far left, you'll see here is an email. This is a very common one. It's actively monitoring a user and how they're using email. Are they, what they're sending out, what they're receiving. Is there information within those emails that are violating policies on intellectual property or personal information, for example, like Social Security numbers? Is there information going out in these emails that potentially could be an issue with fraud or waste, as well as other indicators? So the email piece of this is very, very interesting. We've had some financial services companies that have policies in place where emails can only be sent internally, and there's very few people that have the ability to send emails outside the organization. They can receive emails but can't send information out. And the whole point of that is, from a compliance and regulation standpoint, they have processes and procedures in place to try to control what information is leaving the organization. However, there are some people that do have the ability to send things out. And it's very important that they have a technology in place to be able to monitor those users that do have the ability to send information out, to determine whether or not information that's being sent out is actually violating any of their rules or regulations they have internally. The next one we have down here, just a quick highlight, is browser activity right here. And it's very hard for me with the mouse here. So this is actually monitoring all communications over the internet. So if a company employees have the ability to go out on the internet to do research or purchase information or purchase products, anything of that nature, if they have the ability to go out to search and look at anything they want, that does create some challenges from a compliance standpoint, specifically with users going to sites where they're able to upload information from the internal network out and that's what we consider one avenue of an exit point outside of an organization. So the SureView tool is very good at being able to actively and near real-time monitor what sites a user is going to, what information they might potentially be downloading, and what information they might potentially be sending out through either webmail or sending attachments to another web server somewhere. To go down the line here, just to highlight a couple more direct ones that deal with some insider threat activity. We have one here which is called a file sensor, file monitor. So essentially what this is doing, like the gentleman had mentioned earlier, this is monitoring all types of interactions with files on the network. So anytime a user is looking at files or doing bulk copies, moving files, or even to a level of copying information down to a removable media device and being able to just unplug it and walk out the door with it. This particular component within the software is very good at actively monitoring how files are accessed, and more importantly, what users are doing with those files once they access the information. And we can quickly determine whether or not a user is simply just opening something and working on a document, or if a user is intentionally or is attempting to grab important information out of files and writing them to some type of media where they can leave the building with it.
Rob, this is Alan.
Yes. Oh, sure.
Can you elaborate on that? Because we're constantly saying the insider threat, implying that all the employees are a danger to a company. And what you just said is rather significant, that many of these things can happen accidental. And SureView has the ability to stop the accidental. And Joe had sent me some information a couple of months ago. I think the figure is something like 65% of the insider threats by employees always seem to happen as an accident. A lost laptop, a lost email, but please elaborate on that.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that's very interesting with some of the companies we've worked with so far after deploying this technology and collecting information, they've actually used it to actually go through and evaluate the activity that's going on the network, because being at the endpoint, you get much more visibility than at a higher level at firewalls. And what they found out is that as they've started looking at information, they've actually used this data to reinforce to see if their compliance policies are actually working. So what we're seeing is, in some organizations, we've seen where, say for example, in some organizations, there only might be 5 people that should have access to copy information down to a thumb drive to leave. And so what we've ended up finding out is, through this collection, this particular customer happened to find 3 or 4 times as many people having access to removable media than they should have. So right away, they noticed there were gaps in their security and gaps and vulnerabilities where certain compliance or certain regulations that were in place that should lock down that type of activity wasn't being as enforced as much as they thought it was. So, so in a lot of cases, we've seen where customers have seen this type of activity where it's not the fault of the employee. In the employee's mind, they thought they had access when, in reality, they should not have had access to that drive to be able to perform that type of file activity action. Does that sort of explain it, Alan, what you were looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, and just to highlight just a couple more here. One big one we do have here is what we call a printer sensor. So, as you may very well see, a lot of users who might not be able to get access to copy files down to some type of media to walk out the door. If they have access to a network printer and they can print out hard copies, that's another very easy way to leave a building. And especially if you have organizations that don't do bag checks, at the door when you leave. So one thing we found with this, organizations are very, very interested in seeing what users are printing, and so they have the ability to have somewhat of an idea of the type of information that's being printed, and if something walks out the door and something ends up getting outside the organization, they can go back and actually evaluate print activity tied to users to figure out who's actually printed what document, and specifically what information was in a particular document that may have walked out the door. A couple more just to highlight here real quick that we have here all the way at the end here is one we call a video collector. Now this is just what we call a replay collector. So what this is doing is this is essentially recording what's on your screen, and so you have the ability to visually see everything that a user was doing throughout the day, in addition to the actual context around what they were doing. So, for example, if we have a situation where somebody attempts to send an email out with certain information that's a violation of a compliance policy within the organization, you will get an alert that there was an attempt to do that. And in addition to that, you will actually capture a full video of that event taking place or leading up to it. So this tool gives you the ability to record up to X number of minutes prior to an event and beyond it. So from an investigation standpoint, if you do have some type of a compliance violation, you can actually go back and roll up the window of video and essentially replay a full recording of what that user is doing across the board. So those are some of the main highlights of some of the main sensors that we use that specifically address a lot of compliance and privacy issues with that sense. So down at the bottom right-hand side, what you see here is some additional resources that we have. So what's happening is SureView is collecting all of this IT activity that's happening, say, for example, on a workstation. What we also have in addition is we actually pull in additional resources to, in a lack of a better word, paint a bigger picture of a user's activity, which can indicate exactly changes in behavior. So some examples of what we can pull in are HR records. So if you have a system and employees, for example, get a bad review, you can actually pull that information in right away and have that tied to a user who's on your system. So if you see that type of alert coming in and being alerted, hey, this person just got a bad review, then you can actually start looking at that user's behavior and how they're interacting on that system from that point beyond. And we've had customers who have been very interested, who tie this type of information in, who are very interested to see once they get that alert that a user, an employee had a bad review, they want to monitor a little bit closer what they're doing, and they want to see if there's any upticks in activity that they don't normally do on a daily basis, which is an indicator to them that that's something they have to really start looking at more closely to potentially try to stop some type of a data breach from happening. Some other information that we have here is physical access to the information. So we can pull in badge records, we can pull in all types of communications, phone records, any of those types of information. All that information can actually be pulled right into a system to allow you to have one easy location to track a user from the time they come into the building to the time they leave and everything they've done in between. So in the, at a very high level, that's how this software, this technology works, and that's how it collects information to allow personnel, whether it's security or whether it's an HR system or HR department, to be able to work with the security personnel to instruct this technology to alert them if certain activities happen to better protect the organization.
We have found that a number of our clients who have installed SureView like it because it offers the ability of establishing the policies after communicating with their attorneys and their HR people so that the compliance matches the compliance requirements of the reporting agencies they have to deal with. But more important, since it's deployed at all the endpoints, it offers the ability to have a 100% audit capability with all the necessary records. One of our clients, as he put it in, discovered that since he had such detailed records in his system to begin with, was able to go back approximately 6 months in order to review adherence to the policies he had and make the necessary changes accordingly. In that case, it was used more as a training tool to tighten up all the requirements for all his employees, many of them not even knowing they were violating policies that were in effect.
Yeah, Alan, exactly, and that's correct. And we are seeing that more and more. We're starting to see risk management programs and HR much more involved with the deployment of technology like this. So they can actually, again, it's more important for them to see where their gaps are in terms of how they need to educate their employees so they don't continue to violate these policies. And this tool has been, because this tool is able to put a lot of context around what a user is doing throughout the day, you can easily identify what those gaps are, what those potential concerns are that could become bigger issues down the road, and it allows these organizations to refine their training and their education to be able to apply that to try to improve those specific situations.
Rob, if you can just address the history of SureView, I think that would be helpful also.
Okay, sure. So the history, this tool itself has been around since 2004. It's been in operational environment since 2004. We started out originally, this tool started out in big federal government. And it was primarily, what we were seeing were a lot of organizations had protections in place, monitoring at the firewall back to what we would consider like servers, where all your information is stored, right? So from that point, some things have happened where they realized that the only way they could tell that incidents, specific events were happening in the future after the fact, after doing some damage assessments, were that they had to go back to the endpoint, all the way back to the endpoint, to truly see what was going on between the workstation and the server and everything in between. And there was no visibility there, and they quickly learned that they needed something, a tool or technology in place to be able to provide that information. So for the first few years, this is really deployed and helped big federal agencies with their security requirements and their compliance, and essentially just monitoring insiders as part of an overall risk management program. From there, it actually, we started seeing a lot of interest in, popping up, obviously, in the news with proprietary information and personal information being released. A lot of companies, their reputations being damaged because of hacks. In a lot of cases, there were insiders involved, at some point along the line, like Alan was saying before. So from a commercial side, we started getting a lot of commercial interest in being able to monitor, to alert upper management potentially when situations were happening where an insider could potentially be working or doing something to potentially allow an outsider to get information. So we went from the traditional big government side to more of the financial world and the healthcare and the retail, especially in the retail side. So what we found out, we did that for a few years, and now over the last year or so, specifically financial services companies have been very, very interested in making sure that they're able to go back to regulators to say, hey, we have the tools in place to ensure that not only is our network locked down to the best of our ability, but we are also actively monitoring our employees internally to make sure that we're actually getting one step ahead of employees to make sure that we don't have breaches or we don't have loss of personal information or anything that could potentially damage the reputation of a company or financially. And so we've gotten to the point now where we're a little over 1 million endpoints monitored across both federal, retail, and financial services. And that's potentially that's basically where we're at today. And again, we continue to move forward at a fairly quick pace with a lot of interest from different types of commercial organizations, specifically financial services.
Thank you, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
Pat, have we had any questions come up?
We have. Let's see if there are any questions from the audience first, just out of curiosity.
Okay.
I'm on the phone. Can I ask something?
Certainly.
Hi, it's Sherry Davidson. Just recently, I just read on a blog that a law firm was hacked, but they were hacked very interesting. Somebody was just sitting and waiting to hear about a business transaction. I believe it was on a real estate deal with a closing of like $1 million that needed to be transferred. But the hacker on the other side was like figured out how to create letterhead and do everything to actually send an email stating, okay, please send X amount of dollars to XYZ. The attorneys, for some reason, picked it up and realized something was fishy about this, but the hacker was actually waiting and trying to read as much as they could and use as much as the same language. But they could have easily gotten in and had like $1 million transferred to another bank account. Would Raytheon's product, even though it's focusing on the insider, pick up something like that because this person was acting like an insider?
Okay. Now, was this an email that was sent to an internal employee?
I believe so.
Okay.
But
okay.
it was,
yeah.
but it.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. So this is more of a, for lack of a better word, like more of a phishing thing, like you're looking for information. So from a SureView standpoint, again, this goes back to what Alan and Joe were saying about compliance and educating users. You know, you've seen that before. If you see something that doesn't look right, don't open it. Just notify your security department right away. But a lot of organizations that are smaller might not have that type of infrastructure in place. So what we can do, and we've actually have done this in certain situations. If incoming email is coming in and you sort of have an idea of certain values or certain things as part of the body of that email that what we would consider or what you would consider potentially suspicious, we can flag that. What we can't do is, unfortunately, from a user standpoint, we don't block that email. But what we can do is notify somebody right away that somebody did open a suspicious email, and that's something that somebody needs to look at right away. So I'm not sure that answers your question or not, but from a compliance standpoint with SureView, it's not designed to block the email. Hopefully, there might be some other mechanisms in place to block that type of things. But in my experience,
I wasn't really looking for the blocking per se. I was looking for like, oh my gosh, somebody's acting like an employee of our firm, which they aren't.
Right. Okay.
And they were sending out information to do the transfers of funds or whatever. So
right.
It basically would be like a security bing, 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 look at this.
Right.
A little more cost.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and one way we can, because a lot of times when emails are coming in, it might, you can see it as, the actual email address is a little bit different than what your employees are. So the short answer is we can configure policies with SureView to look for those types of sequence of events happening. We can certainly do that. Now at the other end of it, hopefully there's enough training in place and alerts in place to say, if somebody does come in and do this. But if somebody did open that email, and we did have a flag in place that said, hey, if this type of email comes in with these types of information in the email, flag that immediately, and that actually alert can be sent immediately to somebody to actually start taking a look at it and taking action on it right away.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions from the audience right now? Again, if you're on a phone, you can ask by phone. If you want, you can also send me a chat message. Okay. Well, your video on. While the presentation was going on, I received a number of emails. First one. Questions are, can my regular corporate attorney help me with compliance? So I guess this one goes to...
Joe, do you want to handle that or should I? Because I have usually the experience in dealing with that.
No, you go ahead, Alan. That's fine.
We have found that most corporate attorneys are experts in real estate, financial transactions, not too expert in privacy. We always recommend to our clients that they should find a privacy attorney. The intricacies and the complexities are very, very involved, and you need someone who is really a specialist in that. We developed a relationship with Joe Lazzarati and his team because of that expertise that you don't normally find on a regular basis. So by all means, you have to find an attorney who is a specialist in privacy.
Okay. Number two, how do I know what regulations to follow for compliance?
This is Joe. that question really is going to depend on a number of things. Obviously, the business that you're in will dictate, particularly at the federal level, what types of regulations you have to follow. The state that you're in, frequently and more recently, states are getting more active in this area. States like Massachusetts and California, Oregon and Florida are updating and strengthening their data privacy laws. But what's also happening, not in terms of not just regulation, increasingly you're seeing as part of business deals and relationships, companies are inserting into contracts elaborate requirements to safeguard data beyond just the general you must safeguard data. They're actually including specific requirements, and so in terms of developing a compliance program, you want to think about the regulations that apply in your industry, in your state, but also what you've agreed to do and what you may be saying publicly in things like a privacy statement on your website.
We're finding it goes even beyond that on a practical basis. In the hedge fund financial services market, we're seeing that there's a number of companies that are finding that their potential clients are asking questions of the hedge fund as to what their privacy policies are, as well as what are their cybersecurity solutions. They don't want to deal with companies that have the potential of risk factors.
Okay, this one is kind of interesting. Came across and says, I'm a small company with less than 50 employees. Why should I care?
Well, well, I can chime in just a little bit on that one because again with SureView, again we have it deployed to very, very small companies all the way up to 100,000 plus endpoints. So, and one thing we've actually found, just my experience going across all those guys, it doesn't matter whether or not you're a company that's 50 or 30 people or below, or you're a company that's over 100,000. It only takes one or two people to who have bad intentions to do a lot of damage to a company's either reputation or finances. So again, like Alan was saying, a lot of people, employees within organizations, are very honest and they do their job, and but it is those, that's very, very, very small percentage of users on your network that either intentionally or unintentionally can do something, whether it's due to a lack of education or they're intentionally trying to get some gain out of it, can do a lot of damage. So even if you're a small company, if you have a lot of information and you're dealing with a lot of customers, and your reputation means quite a bit to you, it's very important, I think, even if you're as small as you are, to monitor what your people are doing to make sure you're protecting your company and everything that goes along with that.
Yeah.
Very often you'll find that the small companies are used as stepping stones into their clients' lists, because the back door is usually the easiest way in from a small company to a larger company.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what happened in the Target case. And the other thing is, I would measure the risk not necessarily by the number of employees, but by the number of individuals for whom you possess data. I mean, you can get a small company that has 20 employees but processes claims for insurance carriers, for example, and they are in possession of thousands of people's information. Similarly, you can have a small technology company that maybe is about to be purchased by a huge technology company for billions of dollars, and they only have 60 employees but have valuable intellectual property, very valuable, obviously, intellectual property that could be attacked. So, yeah.
Okay, this one came through a little bit ago. Can't my IT department simply set up filters to catch any insider threat?
Filters alone, I mean, filters you can sort of look at that in two ways. Traditionally, a lot of filters that you have are what we consider right at the perimeter, like at the border of your organization, protecting the outside world from the inside world. And there are technologies out there specifically that address say, for example, email filters. So if emails are passing through, going outside the organization, they have to go through these appliances, what we call them, to look at emails. And essentially, you know, what they're doing is they're setting up policies to look at these emails, and if something hits that violates some type of rule that they're looking for, they won't allow the email to come out. So filters, to a certain degree, help in protecting or preventing potentially damaging emails, you know, from getting out of the organization with personal information. But again, with my experience, if a user wants to find a way to get information outside the organization and they know enough about the technologies and the infrastructure that's in place, they can find ways to get around it. And to give you an example of that, again, at an organization, you know, there were filters in place to block information. So this person found a way to go through a web browser to, you know, establish multiple connections to be able to get to where they wanted to go. So, so again, filters are very good, but they're only as good as as effective as the configuration you have in place. And if you let those configurations, you know, you become complacent and you don't update those and constantly look at them, this is where, from an endpoint, this is where you can actually see somebody trying to circumvent those filters and try to bypass a lot of that security to get around it. So, you know, the filters alone get you to a certain point, but you traditionally really need to look at what a user's doing and how they might be trying to get around those filters at the endpoint.
Cool. Also, another one kind of a follow-up is, all this sounds very expensive. Can't I just buy insurance and that'll protect me, right?
Nope.
I couldn't know the answer to that one, but you know, had to ask it.
Insurance is getting to be a rather sophisticated methodology of protecting a company, because the insurance companies want to make sure that you as a company are taking very active steps to protect it. If you recognize you have a threat, the insurance company doesn't want to absorb their cost of the threat. They want you to participate in preventing this. Sometimes the insurance carriers will even have questions as to what your compliance considerations are, what type of software you're using, what kind of methodologies you use, and this in turn will affect the pricing of your insurance. I think it's important to note that very often some of these large companies thought they were insured on cyber insurance, and it turned out they weren't because of activities they had taken. That also requires very careful consideration, and just buying a cyber policy, that's like saying I'm buying a suit. There's many different sizes, styles, and fits. So that's something that you have to do in collaboration with your attorneys and your IT people.
All right, this one just came through. It says, this is more of a compliance question, I think. Do we have a duty to monitor, and when do we have to stop monitoring?
So, kind of gets at the question before, I guess, in terms of what, how do we know what compliance regulations you have to follow? Depending on your industry, you may have a duty to monitor. Depending on circumstances, you may have a duty to monitor. There was a case in New Jersey where the company saw emails, saw internet activity by an employee on questionable sites, and wound up that the person was uploading pornographic images of a 15-year-old, and court held that the company probably should have monitored a little bit more to find that out and stop it. And it's kind of the first case of its kind. So the duty can be created in different ways. Obviously, one is regulation, industry practice, circumstances. In terms of when to stop monitoring, again, it kind of depends upon you know, what's driving the requirement or the action of monitoring, but kind of what we were talking about before, this idea of continuous surveillance can create issues. There's always the concern about monitoring employees all the time, and that, you know, that would go beyond a reasonable expectation of privacy. If, for example, you were always monitoring an employee's device and looking at all the communications that they were making during non-work hours, so you really have to think about the circumstances and the type of business you're in to help manage those expectations.
Yes, go ahead. Was there a question? No? Okay. Actually, we're coming up on the end time, but I got a comment. Somebody texted me. They said, I went to my baker for their advice, and they told me that the best thing for me to do was to change my passwords. Don't know if anybody wants to address that or anybody wants.
This is a very sophisticated world.
Oh, that's cake.
The aspect of passwords in much of the software is passé. A company has to take a much more active participation. When we set up programs for companies, we ask them to change their passwords on a regular basis, and that's usually the biggest complaint from the employees. The utilization of software such as SureView really goes way beyond that consideration, and the governmental regulations and the governmental agencies are indicating that they prefer software to protect companies and keep auditing at its highest level and not rely upon passwords. Passwords are very easily broken into, especially when the figures are showing that the most common password in the United States, I think the last figure I saw, 40%, was the word password. So that's not really a good protection.
Right.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay. So, if anybody have any other questions they want to ask? Anybody from the audience or? Okay.
I think one question, Pat, if anybody who's listening wants to be able to contact any of the speakers, how would they do that?
For those of you that are watching this after the fact from the on-demand event site, send your email to info@smlrgroup.com and simply give us your question, and we will address it either in an email or in a future webinar. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your participation. Any last comments from the panelists?
Just to thank you, Joe Lazzarati and Rob Robinette, for your participation. Looking forward to working with you again.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Thank you for your time.
Excellent. And again, this will be available on demand at the smlrgroup.com/events/on-demand events. Thank you very much for your participation, and that concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.